Okay, I'm going to show you some really cool tricks in Blender to make textures like these. And this includes multiple passes. These are great textures for sci-fi art, for greebles, buildings, architecture, floor plates, all kinds of stuff. And because we're making this in Blender, we can render these with any resolution we need. You can even make 8K textures or 16K textures if you want to be ridiculous. We have complete control over the shapes and the style, the density, the colors. We can randomize them to make endless variations of exported textures. And I'll even show you how to make these seamless within Blender without having to use Photoshop or GIMP. And like I said earlier, you can export multiple passes such as the color layer, ambient occlusion, lines using Freestyle, the shadow pass. You can export height using the mist. And I'll show you how to use random colors on the different pieces to give it some nice variety. Now you're probably thinking, I can just use JSplacement for this. You're completely right, and that's kind of what gave me the idea to do this in Blender, to see if I could and what I could get out of it. And I found a lot of flexibility that you don't have in JSplacement. So let's get to it. I am using KCyclesX 3.2, just came out I think last week, and let's set up the basic scene. So we've already got a light in your default scene. I'm going to reset the rotation to make it point straight downwards by pressing Alt-R. If you go to the object settings, rotations are all 0. We want a downward sunlight. Make sure it's a sun and not a point. Next, we're going to make an emitter plane in the middle. So Shift A, make a plane, scale it up by 10. So S10, enter. Now this is where our parts are going to generate on, and we need to have a collection of parts that will be over to the side outside the rendering frame. So over here, we can press C to make a collection, and I'm going to name it parts. Last thing for this scene setup is we need the camera to look straight downwards onto our plane so that we can render isometrically, which means no 3D depth or perspective, just flat shapes. So we can press 7 to get an above view, which is also flat. Press period to center your shape, and then Control Alt 0 to set your camera, which is right here, to your view, which was a flat above view. Now the camera is not in isometric or orthographic view, so let's change that to orthographic. And now it's weird because we don't really have millimeters for our zoom, we have size. And we're gonna put this exactly at 20, and I'm gonna export square textures. So make this 2048 by 2048. There we go. Now, if you got all those numbers correct, your camera view, which is set to 20 in orthographic scale, is exactly the size of this 20 by 20 unit square. Perfect for rendering because the edge of the square is the edge of the image texture. You don't have to perfectly line up stuff or be meticulous. It's already done for you. All right, now let's get to the fun part. We're going to make a bunch of shapes over here, and then we're going to use some geometry nodes to scatter these all over this. And I'll show you some additional tricks on how to get what we need to make these textures. So with my flat above view, I'm just going to click with my 3D cursor, Shift A, I'm going to make some planes. I'm going to keep the scale the same, and I'm going to copy these a few different times downwards. So Shift D, Y, click to confirm, and then Shift R to repeat that. Now you can do all kinds of things to these shapes in JSplacement. They're called sprites that are going to be generated randomly and rotated randomly on our emitter plane. I'm going to speed up this process by using the box cutter add-on, which is super handy. The easiest way to use it is just it allows you to draw squares and it booleans them. I want to make sure these are destructive. There we go. I don't want actual boolean modifiers. See, it just made 3 booleans right there. So apply, apply, apply. Okay, so click on the next object. It's on destructive mode, which means it's cutting with reckless abandon and applying it. Cool. Oh, you got to select your next shape. Remember to do that. Some I'll do symmetrical, some I'll do very asymmetrical. Now I know there's a bunch of operations and cool tricks when you're using box cutter. I honestly haven't learned any of them. I just know how to do this and also draw custom polygon cutouts. So if you are an advanced box cutter user, I'm sorry. I am not. Guess I need to watch some more tutorials. Okay, so I'm just doing some random cutouts that I think will be cool to see at different rotations. And that is it. Okay, that was fun and cool. Looks like a weird techno alphabet. And these are all inside of our parts collection, right? Yes, all 8 of them are in there. Cool. If they're not, you can select your objects and you can press M for move and then select which collection you want them to go into. But they're already there. And the plane is not in that collection. It is in the main collection of light, the camera and the light. Okay, we're going to delete these cutters. We don't need that because we didn't really use a Boolean. Okay, now let's get to the hard part of the video, which might be what you're here for, but it is geometry nodes. Now this is the geometry node tree that we're going to create. It's not that bad, don't freak out. I'll walk you through it step by step and make it super easy. Basically what it's going to do is scatter points on our emitter plane, going to turn those points into our sprites, those little shapes that we made, and then the rotation of each sprite is going to be randomized on 90-degree increments, so it'll either face north, east, south, or west, nothing in between. And the height is also going to be randomized so that there's no planes intersecting each other and getting that weird, whatever that's called. And that's pretty much it. Oh, we can also scale the size, like the normal scale of the sprites randomly. So let's get to it. Also, this X on top of my plane is actually the camera. It's that. So I'm just going to press select it and press H. I'm going to get back to that above view. So 7 period. There we go. And let's size this down. We're not really going to look at that just yet. We're going to make our geometry nodes first. So select your emitter plane, press new, type in scatter parts, zoom in to where you can read the text well, and then we're going to move these far apart like that. Okay, so first things first is the distribute points on faces. So Shift A, go to the search. That's how I find everything. I never go through menus. I do the search for everything. Distribute points on faces. Put that right in the flow right there. Set this to Poisson disk. We'll play with these later. Next, we need instance on points. So Shift A, type in inst instance on points. Drop that right there. Okay, now what are the instances? In this instance, they're going to be these shapes over here, the parts. So Shift A, type in collection info. There we go. I think you can also drag a collection. Yeah, there we go. That actually does it automatically. So I just clicked on my parts collection, dragged it on here, and it's already got the thing selected. You can grab any collection there. And geometry, see, that's the parts, right? The geometry is going to be the instance. Cool. Now you need to turn on pick instance and separate children and reset children. There we go. That way they'll be separate and not duplicating your entire collection all over the emitter plane. All right, we're getting somewhere. We can see down here stuff's happening. We actually have the parts scattered. If we go to object view, we can see them all intersecting each other with, I don't know what that's called. Ooh, look at that. We got some cool lines already showing up. That looks pretty sweet, right? But wait, you're not done. Don't have fun yet. Do the hard work so you can have more fun later. So we got scale. If you want to randomize your scale, press Shift A, do random value. Right here, we have a minimum and maximum. Plug it into your scale, and we can set a minimum of like, 0.2 or something, and then a maximum of the original scale. Oh, also, I think the scale of our emitter plane may be altering things. So let's check it out. Object info, yeah, it's scaled up by 10. So I'm going to press Control A to apply that scale and basically reset it to 10, reset it to 1. And now we have normal part. The sprites are the realistic size over here if they are in fact generating at 1, which is full scale. If you want them to not be altered, just do minimum 1, maximum 1. And now the scale will not be changed, but we can't really decipher what's happening yet until we do the height trick. But let's do the rotation first. So we also have rotation right here. So we're going to rotate these all randomly in 90-degree increments. So here's a really cool trick that someone showed me on the Blender procedurals group. So Shift A, this random value. Pay attention here. Set this to integer, which is a whole number, and minimum 0, maximum 3. All right. Now this value of a random number, 0, 1, 2, or 3, is going to feed into a map range. This is such a cool and underrated node because there's a ton of really cool tricks. One of them that I barely ever use is stepped linear. So now the value is not going to be, anywhere between 0 and 3 with decimals. It's going to be stepping. And we want there to only be 4 steps, which already has 4, which is great. So it's going to be 0 or 1 or 2 or 3. And we're going to multiply that to get 90-degree rotations. So plug in value into incoming value. We got float, we got step linear. The minimum is going to be 0, maximum is going to be 3, to minimum is 0, and maximum is going to be, type in hashtag pi times 2. There we go, which gets us this number plus a bunch of decimals that we don't see. Did you know you can do that? Type in pi. Remember, you got to do a hashtag first. Cool. And that's all we got to do for this guy. Next, we're going to go to multiply with a math node because we want to get these low values of 0, 1, 2, and 3 and multiply them by 90 to get 90-degree rotations. Multiply. There we go. And then we need to separate to only get the Z value out of this. We're only going to grab the Z and plug it into rotations. There we go. All right, this already looks super cool down here, just the lines, which you can totally render these lines only if you use the Freestyle setting. We'll show you that later. Don't worry, we'll get there. All right, now let's do our height randomization. This part I really don't understand. By the way, I am totally done with geometry nodes. Literally, this is the only stuff I know how to do right now is scattering, because that's really all I care to use it for, but it's all I can barely wrap my brain around. But this part gets a little abstract, but it's not too bad. So Shift A, realize instances. I don't know what that means. Make a duplicate output there. Next is geometry proximity. There, plug it in, target. This needs to be points. Next is combine XYZ. Plug in your distance into Z. And then a vector math. Plug this into the top input and put this as multiply. Put the dot one. This is the number that we're going to use to decide how high these things can go. So I'll just start with number 1. Almost done. Now we need a set position. Whatever the heck this one does, I don't know, but it's going to be cool. And then finally, our geometry from here plugs into here. And this is our final output. Replace it with that. Okay. Hope that wasn't too much for you. Here it is if you need to pause it and do that. And now if we look down here in our 3D view, watch what happens if I increase number 1. Ooh, random height. Very cool and useful. I mean, you could just do like a cool fly through with all these things and have some awesome stuff. But we just want a little bit of height being altered so that there's no intersecting faces. And because this is a flat above view, this is our camera view, there is no perspective. So it doesn't matter how high these things go, you'll never see that third dimension until they pass the camera. Then they'll start disappearing. But, 1 or 2 is fine. All right, now let's have some fun, right? We're pretty much done. We got random scattering, random rotation, and random height. Yay. And now let's go back to our very first node we made, which is this guy. And we can play with the density factor from 0 to 1 to add how many squares we want. We also have a maximum density, which, I guess kind of does that. You can set what the maximum is. You can put it at, half that. I don't really know what use that is, but I just play with these numbers to get the density that you want. Really just eyeball it because we're going for randomness. This is not scientific. We're not copying anything from nature. So random is good. And that looks awesome. All right, next thing is the material. So let's click on this first part, go to material tab, make a new material and call it parts 1, because you may make a bunch of sections of these. You may make 8 of these and try different stuff. So keep them as numbered so we know parts 1 is the very first one. All right, expand this top view, change it to the shader editor and press the home key on your keyboard to find everything. And we're going to plug in the geometry node. This is a really cool one because it has random values, random per island. Let's plug that into the color right there, and then put a color ramp in the middle so we can control the values. If you go to rendered view, by the way, I'm using cycles right now just because it looks the best. And that doesn't look great. So we're actually going to change this to the object info. I think that is better if you've got individual objects. Now this random value is random per object. There we go. So if we turn this up, we get more blacks. Oh, you know what I forgot? The only sprite that has the material is the very first one. Doy. So, all right, so the only this first one has the material applied to it. So select them all by holding shift, grabbing all 7 of these, and then the last one is the one with the material. See how that changed? Now press Control L, which is link materials. And now they all have the material. And look at it. Beautiful. Oh, I love it. 0 for camera view. And there is our first look. So if we press F12 to render, now this is not tiling, obviously. I could export this as an image and use it on a spaceship, but the tile is going to be very obvious. So I'm going to show you how to make it seamless. And it is a rather obvious and weird trick that I just discovered by brainstorming. What we're going to do is grab this guy with our snap turned on, this little magnet. Make sure that absolute grid is turned on. We can move this down here to this corner. Make sure that the center of our plane is right on the corner. See that orange dot? Let me see if I can make this simpler. I'm going to hide the modifier of geometry nodes. There we go. So the center of this plane, see that yellow dot, is right at the corner of the camera. Now we're going to make identical copies of this all the way around. So press Alt D to make a linked copy. Option if you're on Mac. Alt D, Alt D. Now an Alt D or a linked duplicate is a linked copy is an exact copy. If I edit this, if I do any changes to this, it's going to be copied over here. Now I can't add modifiers because modifiers don't copy across, but we already have a modifier that's referring to the data of scatter parts, which is a geometry node. So any change we make on this on here, I'm going to turn this back on. Oh, they're all turned off. There we go. So the geometry nodes are random, right? But they're the exact same pattern on all four. And we're in the middle of all four, which means it's going to tile perfectly. Because where this plane leaves off right here on the edge of the camera, it starts right here. Same with vertical. Where this panel right here stops right here, it starts right here. Cool. So if we render this, now it's perfectly tileable. If you don't believe me, I will prove it to you and make you cry in shame of your wrongness. I'm going to save this to my panels folder, which I made a whole panel for. I made a whole folder for these. I'm going to call this tutorial panel. Seamless. I'm going to spell that. Wow. Just save it as a JPEG. I'll do a PNG. A little bit more, better values. All right, now let's go back. Let's make a new plane over here. And I'm going to apply this texture, size it up big, make a material. Oops, that's not a geometry node. Shader editor, new material, Control T, gives us this quick setup. My panels, tutorial panel seamless, material preview mode. There we go. So right now, if we look at the UV map, this whole panel is getting the whole image, right? One to one. But if we resize our UV, now it's tiling. It's a seamless tile because the shapes carry over. Now, if we go really big, you can see there aren't image boundaries. There's no like hard cutoff like there would be if it was not tiled, because all the shapes, like a puzzle piece, they all kind of carry over into the next image. So yes, it's tiling, but it doesn't have obvious seams, which is what we want. And that is great for mega structures and large things. So pretty cool. Okay, another quick trick is I'm going to give a material to the actual emitter plane so that I can click on here and instantly get the material up here. So we'll just do parts 1, select the others, and linked, Control L, link material. There we go. That way when I click on here, it gives me this, which is nice and quick. Now, some other cool things you can do is you can add an ambient occlusion, which will give you some nice edges. So to do that, Shift A, just type in AM. It's right there. And you can just plug this directly in if you want to just get that. You can use a color ramp to control the edging. You need to be in rendered view to even see what this is doing, because this does not work. There we go. See that nice soft shading? That's ambient occlusion. We can make it more intense. We can make it less intense. Lots of options here. You can increase the distance that it's going to travel by turning up distance. We should just spread it out more. I usually keep it between 1 and 3 though. Let's put it at 2. Cool. So let's render that. Very nice. Definitely usable in sci-fi art. I love that. You could change your random values to be actual colors. So going from blue to yellow, you can add colors in between. Lots of cool stuff to get color schemes if you want to do that. Another material trick to do if you want to get maximum detail out of your setup here is we're going to use alpha. So to do that, we're going to turn alpha down, and you can now see through the panels, which means there's a lot more lines and details and intersection. It might be too much, whereas it just looks like an X-ray image. You know, I'd say maybe around half is cool. So let's do with and without alpha. So let me unplug this. Let's do I'll keep the random values on there. So render, we got this look. When you press J to make a new slot, go back, put my alpha to 0.5, render that. So now I can go back and forth between these two different slots. And it's taking noticeably longer to render because of the transparency. You can see the samples below and below that and below that, because there's a lot of panels being duplicated here, definitely over 100. And it's really thinking hard about the noise samples and the denoising because I'm using cycles. Okay, so let's go back and forth. No alpha, some alpha. See how it increases the detail? Some maybe too much still. So I maybe would bring it up to like 0.75. So it's like 3/4 opaque, 1/4 transparent. And that's nice, just a little bit of randomness. Okay, let's go back to geometry nodes And if we take the density down like that, we can see a background. You can put a solid color back there. You could make a duplicate of this and move it down, but make those larger panels. So you've got some really large, base panels, and then you've got the smaller detail ones on top. And let's play with our randomization of our scale. There we go. So we got some teeny tiny ones. Got some really big ones. Looks great. You can make some of these shapes like a small dot of light so that you've got some random light scattered throughout here. That could be cool with some emission texture on it. Don't forget about circles. You can make pipes and scatter those pipes all over the place. Now, what I did to make my textures that I'll be using on an upcoming Star Wars project is I rendered multiple passes of the same setup. So I would do one render like this with transparency. Then I would do another render like this with ambient occlusion. Then I would do another render like this with the random values connected to the color input. Another cool pass you can do is the Freestyle pass. So go to your render tab and scroll all the way down. At least for me, it's on the bottom. Turn on Freestyle and decide a thickness. Let's keep it at 1 pixel. So for some really fine lines. So if we render this, what's going to happen is going to basically trace the outlines of all the shapes and the geometry, and it's going to add hard pixel lines around everything. This is how a lot of cartoon and anime renders are done in Blender, is with the Freestyle, and there are a ton of settings elsewhere in Blender that you can really customize how the shading and how the lines work. I don't know anything about that stuff. All I know how is to turn it on and get some nice lines. Ooh, look at that. It looks like cell shaded. Speaking of anime, it looks very anime right now with these hard dark lines. Very nice. So I would do a pass without the random colors, but with just the lines. So it's literally black and white with outlines. I'm going to turn that. I'm going to take off those random colors and make my thickness maybe 8, like really thick. Let's see what this looks like. Very cool. Check that out. I use this on my example image to make some really big displacement map using this. And then the rest of the image, like the bump map and other things, use the small lines. So there was like really thick extruded parts, and then the rest of it was not like this. So yeah, lots of cool options. This kind of looks like a really advanced like Voronoi, Chebyshev's texture, but way cooler than what you can get with procedural textures. All right, let's turn off Freestyle. Let's turn our alpha down a little bit. Make our color a little bit darker, and let's put an emission plane underneath this whole thing to make it glow from below, and it looks super cool. So I'm going to move a plane down here, size it up. Oops, not 3D cursor. Size it up pretty big. Give it a new texture with just emission, and I'm going to give it like a creepy red color. Okay, camera view. There we go. You can control how much light comes through based on the alpha and also, of course, the density. Let's split our screen so we can have geometry nodes over here and texture over there. We're going to increase our density, which is pretty low, to about there. Okay, something weird I noticed is, first of all, my parts are gone, but they're just overlapped because of when I expanded everything to make the tile the seamless thing, they got covered up. And check this out. My emission plane is actually in the collection, which is what I don't want. Look at this. It's right here. I'm going to call it underglow. We want this to be just outside of that. So M for move, put it in the collection. There we go. Now it's not going to be duplicated in the geometry nodes once it refreshes. Sometimes it takes a second. There we go. Okay, so we can't see any of the underglowing red yet because it's too dense. So geometry nodes, let's turn the density down until we have a few holes. Okay, now before I render this, I put the random values back on. I turn my roughness all the way up and my alpha to like 0.82, so it's pretty high, so not very transparent. Before I render this, I'm going to turn on my compositor so that I can add the glare that I love. So let's hit F12 and also get out of rendered view, speed up my render. There we go, F12 to render that. Looking pretty cool. We have some red glowing parts popping through the transparency and also through the holes where there are no sprites being generated. And it's almost done. Once it's done, I'm going to add some glare and make this thing really glow. Okay, so my compositor, Shift A, type in GL, plop it in the middle, put this as fog glow, turn my threshold down a little bit. There we go. Got some nice creepy glow. Very cool. Now, if you go to your passes screen and turn on a few of these, turn on mist, turn on emissions, environment shadow, definitely ambient occlusion, you can go to your render and you'll have all these separate passes already available for you to save. So this is an ambient occlusion pass right there that I could save and use in a PBR texture. I got my mist, which is not set up. We'll do that in a minute. Shadows, that's basically the holes. Emission, oh, that's cool. That's the underneath glowing parts. Okay, I'm going to show you how to do a height map. So let's press number 1 for a side view. Zoom in to where you can see the topmost and the bottommost sprites being generated. Click on your camera, which I had hidden. There we go. Go to the camera settings, go to viewport display, and turn on mist. Now go to your world settings. You may actually maybe zoom out, and you need to set a starting point for your mist, which is the top panel. You can see that line moving. Let's go to wireframe mode. Makes it a little bit easier to see. Oh, there we go. So start is here. I'm holding shift to make this more exact. That's the top. That's the highest panel that I see. And then the lowest panel is not below this red line. So turn my depth way down. It's right there. Cool. So now the mist will start here and end there. So let's render this and I'll show you what the mist pass looks like. Okay, so here's the finished render. Let's go to our passes, view layer, and choose mist. There we go. So the darkest is actually on top and the widest is the farther away. You normally need to have that inverted for a height map. That's easy to do in post or in nodes. You can just invert this, no problem. But that is how you make a height map of 3D geometry. It's very useful for all kinds of things, such as bump map, displacement map, and you can definitely use displacement in your PBRs using this method. Lots of fun there and lots of possibilities. All right, I messed up on the geometry nodes earlier when I showed you how to do the random rotation. I'm going to show you how to fix that. I suspected that my parts weren't rotating correctly just by looking at what I was doing earlier, and I tested it out. So I moved everything outside the collection except for this first one, and sure enough, they're not rotating. And I found out what I did wrong. It's pretty simple. I didn't combine this back into a normal vector signal, which is what rotation needs. So we separated it into separate, values, but we need to combine them back. So do Shift A, and type in COMB, combine X, Y, Z right there. Drop it right there. Make sure Z is going to Z. X and Y are zeros. And now it's a true vector signal with just 0 there and the random number in the Z, which is what the rotation is that we want. You can test it out by doing this. See how they spin? Well, we want them to only go in 90-degree increments. And now, as you can tell, they are in random rotations. One more thing you want to change is delete that driver that we did earlier with the pi trick and just do number sign pi, just a single pi, and then make your steps up to 6. And then lastly, change your multiply degrees to 45. And now we have things truly rotating at all degrees, upside down, all that stuff. Okay, so I think we're good. I'm sorry about messing that up. Like I said, I'm terrible at geometry nodes. I don't know what I'm doing. So let's put these, I'm going to put these parts back in the collection M. And let's turn that density back up. I turned my density way down because I was thinking, you know what, something doesn't look right. There we go. Now we've got true random spritiness and delicious density. Cool, that's it for the bulk of this video. We're done, but I did want to show you a little bonus here, how I use this tiling trick with non-geometry nodes. You don't have to know geometry nodes to do this. So check this out. This is something that I will probably be selling soon, is some texture packs that resemble a specific science fiction franchise that happens in a galaxy far, far away that shall not be mentioned. So as you can tell, this is a solid mesh, right? Good old modeling, bunch of duplicated shapes and all that stuff. I did make them fit to the grid, which then they fit with each other puzzle pieces. These are all the same. These are just duplicates of this first one. And I put my camera in the middle and I rendered it. And that's how I got a perfect tiled image. Of course, you have way more control over this type of stuff because it's modeled, it's not geometry nodes, it's not random. So you can make more specific styles and aesthetics. You can add pieces where you want them to be. You can add pipes and, better geometry that works with the other geometry next to it. It's all up to you. It's hand modeled. But once you do that and render it, you can do all the different passes I just showed you how to do and have tons of custom made PBR materials for your own using. So thank you guys for watching. If you had any questions, please ask in the comments down below. Check out the products that I have available online because I've got some really good ones if you love sci-fi art and procedural materials. Hopefully you'll be back here soon. Have a great week.